Hey, it's Metal Dave along with my co-host Jason McMaster bringing you another episode of the Talk Louder podcast. How's it going, Jace?
It's going good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. We got a great show for everyone tonight. We're going to talk about a topic that's been discussed quite a bit, but we're going to bring in some names that aren't always referenced on this subject, and that is replacement singers. And I will be leaning on you as the professional singer here in the bunch to bring in and share some of your insight. But first, before we get to that, what's going on? What are you listening to? Anything got your attention this week?
Well, I've been busy recording some stuff, and there was actually a little bit of a deadline. Not to turn this into a plug or anything, but there's this band from Arkansas, from Little Rock. They're called Wake, but the band name is spelled R-W-A-K-E. It looks like it says R Wake. And I want to say they were on Prosthetic Records for a long time, and they're like this sludgy doom band. Anyway, they have a second band, another project called Dead Bird. Stay with me. So similar type of material, maybe a couple of different dudes in the band or whatever, right? Honestly, don't know a whole hell of a lot about either of those bands other than they're really cool people. And I've met Broken Teeth actually played with them at a bar that they run. I forget the name of the band. It's called like the Downtown or something like that. Jared might remember. I'm not sure. But anyway, so Dead Bird, they have this song called Heyday on one of their records, and it's already like a 6.5 minute song, doomy sludge kind of stuff. Yeah. Well, they did a mashup of their song with a Dangerous Toys song. The song Feels Like a Hammer.
Yeah.
So there's this 13.5 minutes song now made up of a Dead Bird song and a Dangerous Toys song, tuned down to like C sharp. So it's nice and fat and sludgy in the style of their band. But the catch is they had me sing the lead vocal all the way through the mashup. So I'm singing lead vocals on their song. Then it just morphs into the Dangerous Toys song. So I'm singing this new low-tuned, heavier version of Feels Like a Hammer. And I've been working on that, and it came out pretty cool. And so I can't wait for that to come out. I don't have any news other than when it's gonna be available, or if we're gonna make a video, or it's just I chalk it up to another COVID project, but it was all their idea. They're super cool guys. They love what I do. And that's what I've been doing. Pretty fun.
Nice. Well, last night I watched a documentary. I don't remember if it was on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime or whatever, but it's simply called The Rainbow. And it's about the famous Rainbow Bar and Grill on the Sunset Strip. And it came out in 2019. And for a nerd like me, it was totally interesting. So it kind of talks about the entire history of the establishment, which has been around forever. And as part of the story, they interview Lemmy and Ozzy and Gene Simmons and Slash and Lita Ford. And it was kind of funny, the interview segments with Ozzy and Lemmy, they had subtitles because it was really hard to understand them in their unique and lovable way. And then it interviewed 3 generations of the owners. These guys, the family's called the Maglieri family. I'm probably butchering that name, but the grandfather started it. His son took over at some point, and now the grandson is running most of the operations. And so it was a really cool history of this iconic landmark on Sunset Strip where all the rock stars and movie stars and whatever hangs out. And like I said, they did some interviews with some pretty cool people, made it interesting. Interesting side note. I went to Hollywood in the late 90s, and I was with my friend Buzz, and we went to the Rainbow, and he ended up losing his wallet or ID card or credit card or all of the above. So we're staying at a hotel on the Sunset Strip. The next morning, we called the Rainbow, and somebody answers. And the guy says, "Yeah, I think I saw it. Why don't you boys come on down and we'll see what we can do about getting it back to you." So we go knock on the door. This is before business hours, right? So it's like early to mid morning. This guy opens the door, lets us in. He's a gray-haired dude, kind of I don't mean this with any disrespect. He's kind of the stereotypical Italian mobster looking dude and sounding dude. So I feel like, we're following one of the Sopranos he's leading us through the Rainbow. It's dark. There's nobody there. And he takes us into this back room or this upstairs office or whatever and rifles through the lost and found and gives us back our property or whatever. But it was interesting to see him featured in this documentary last night, because it was many years later that I realized, wow, that was the owner that helped us out. And by all accounts, everyone that's being interviewed in the documentary says what a great guy he was. And so anyway, that kept me busy for an hour and a half last night.
There's proof right there. He found your wallet, and he didn't auction it off to somebody who was broke and needed to pay their tab.
Yeah, right.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of how that works.
So
yeah, legendary. I actually like the food at the Rainbow. The food is
they got great food.
You
know what? One of the interviews is Steve Riley from Wasp and LA Guns, and he actually made that point. He said they serve food, and the thing is, the food is really good. And of course, they're famous for their pizza. But yeah, it was cool. It was a great documentary. If you've been there and you're familiar with the place, you'll enjoy it. And if you don't know much about the history of it, it's a pretty comprehensive look at this iconic place where, all the rock stars, especially Lemmy, hung out and made their second home.
Yep.
So we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to move into our next segment. And today's topic is replacement singers. It's been debated quite a bit. People have their opinions about some of the big names, and we're probably going to touch on a few of the lesser knowns, but let's jump right in. Replacement singers, Jason, who strikes you as the guy that, did the best job stepping in for his predecessor?
Well, we were chatting earlier today, and I realized that this is kind of a very important subject to me, because I'm one of the people that, if you're this is an example. If you're a Kiss fan and you don't know that's not Ace Frehley up on the stage at a Kiss concert, then
you're not a Kiss fan.
I almost think less of you, and I shouldn't say that, because I don't necessarily think less of you just because you think that that's Ace Frehley on the stage, and it's obviously, to me, it's not Ace Frehley. But, doing a fantastic job. Whoever's wearing the costume is doing a great job. Tommy Thayer is very, very talented person. He could do anything you would want him to do on the guitar. So, the main thing to me would be in this topic, replacement singers, would be, okay, if I'm AC/DC and I'm Bon Scott and my record is breaking for the last couple of my records are starting to break, I'm gaining footprint in America, being an Australian band, and then Bon Scott passes away, like complete surprise. I'm still reading Rob Halford's book where he's saying they're on tour with AC/DC, and they end their tour and they were all drinking buddies and they hug and they all go home, and 4 weeks later Rob says Bon was dead. And that shocked that world, right? Because Highway to Hell was only the beginning of the real sort of Americanization of AC/DC.
Yeah.
And they hadn't quite gotten, this is terrible terminology, but they hadn't quite reached soccer mom status. You know what I mean? They hadn't quite gotten on the top 40. You know what I mean? Of course,
Yeah.
they're not to their biggest song at the moment was Highway to Hell.
Yeah.
So, and I love that because it was a throw at Stairway to Heaven. That to me was really awesome. That it's the late 70s and the biggest song on the radio is Stairway to Heaven, and here your hot new single is called Highway to Hell. I just thought that as a young person who was into Led Zeppelin a little bit, heavier into Kiss, but AC/DC is like, I heard Highway to Hell and went backwards,
Yeah.
Got the live album, I got the, If You Want Blood, You Got It, and I just went backwards and completely fell in love with the band. Learning later on that Bon was actually a replacement singer.
That's true.
I've got some information about this guy, Dave Evans, who I think lives in the DFW area here in Texas.
Yes.
Dave Evans, yeah. And I actually really like Dave Evans' singing voice very, very much. And he actually had a hit record that was on the charts with AC/DC back in 73, 74 called Can I Sit Next to You, Girl?
That's right.
And you can hear this song all over the place. It ended up being on an AC/DC record, but the point that I'm trying to make here, I'm talking fast because we have a lot to talk about, is that it actually says that in an interview that was just a couple of years ago, I checked this, that Dave Evans said the reason he left AC/DC is because he was not getting paid. Moment of silence. Okay.
Who was getting paid at that point?
If he was just would have just waited a little while longer, if he could have held out and still kept his job in AC/DC, if the brothers would have written, a comparable song to Highway to Hell without the inclusion of Bon Scott and gained footprint in America, Dave, if you just waited a little while longer, I think you would have gotten paid.
Yeah.
And I'm not making it's not disrespect to Dave Evans whatsoever. I'm just saying that that's the reason he gives for leaving AC/DC. I've heard other reasons why, but that
I was going to say
that gets long-winded. So
the point being that Bon Scott was actually a replacement singer himself.
Correct.
And then, of course, along comes Brian Johnson, and that's where most people pick up, and most people make the connection from most people make the leap from Bon to Brian, and obviously huge success with Brian. But like you said earlier, before we went on, before we hit record, AC/DC was in that rare position where finding another singer wasn't a conscious decision. They were forced to, because Bon just died, and then it was, do we continue? Do we not? And then they go out and they find Brian Johnson, and of course, the rest is history. But so your thoughts on Brian Johnson? I know you're a huge Bon Scott fan, but did they find the right man for the job?
Honestly, I am just as big a Brian Johnson fan as I am a Bon Scott. Now, I probably wouldn't tattoo Brian Johnson on my body, but I have a Bon Scott tattoo that pairs well with your Angus Young tattoo. I'll just put that out in radio land. But the point here is that when Bon dies and then Back in Black comes out and it's not Bon anymore, there is this sort of like blurry area as a sort of what I call a fair weathered fan who doesn't even realize that Bon died and they have a new singer. They just think, oh, have you heard AC/DC's new record? All in the same breath, like, oh man, I love their Highway to Hell record, but man, this one is really cool. And there's no mention of, hey, they got a new singer, or there's no mention of, oh my God, what are they going to do? Bon Scott died. There was all of that. I remember hearing that Bon Scott died, and and this would have been in, 78 and 79 when, Highway to Hell was so big, and it was like totally fresh to me. And I listened to that record every day for about 2 years, and it might have been an exaggeration, but not by much. And then getting Back in Black, and like really having this this back to back listening party on my own of I couldn't decide which one I liked better.
Yeah.
And I still can't decide which one I like better. Back in Black is such a beast, but there's such amazing songs on, going back to Power Age. And then you think Highway to Hell, which was kind of no wonder they were becoming an American, this new record by this Australian band, blah blah blah. Okay, my thoughts on that. I think that mega stardom answers that question.
Yeah. I mean, the record sales kind of speak for themselves, don't they? But I thought Brian did a great job filling impossible shoes, and then the singing on Back in Black, and for those about to rock. And I've always been a huge fan of Flick of the Switch. I thought he did a great job, put out 3 great records in a row with a band that, as you said, was on the right on the cusp of breaking it big in America, and then they just kicked the door off the hinges. And as a singer, I thought he was great, especially back then. I don't know how he could sing like that. And I think time has proven that maybe it wasn't such a great idea to come across with such an aggressive, raspy voice. But he was a great fit for the band, did great things with him, obviously, and still is today. I think the new album they just put out, Power Up, is a great record as well. So hard to argue. I mean, everybody's going to have their preferences. It's the age-old thing, Bond versus Brian, Roth versus Hagar, Ozzy versus Dio. Everybody's going to have their opinions, but hard to deny that Brian Johnson did a great job. And I like the fact that he's just kind of a blue-collar, tough, guy down at the bar sort of dude,
This I'm realizing right now, and actually earlier, but I wanted to say it out loud. This exact switch over, the changing of the guard, this could be a whole other show as well. I mean, there's so much background trivia and things like that about what was happening. Brian was in a band called Gordy, and by the way, he was already singing exactly like that in Gordy.
Yeah.
Super high. He talks raspy, so he sings raspy because he talks raspy. And if you go back and listen and focus on different notes that he's hitting that are super high, it's high and very clean. It's not high and raspy. It's high and very clean. So he's actually raspier when he's down in his low voice, So it's interesting. There's lots of technique going on, but I could talk all day about that. I want to jump into one and then and create this palette and then let you take the reins on it. So let's talk about Riot and Guy Speranza into Rhett, Forrester. Go. 10 seconds on the clock.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Guy Speranza was an amazing singer. But I always thought that Restless Breed with Rhett Forrester on vocals was a really, really great record. And I don't know that it gets the love that I think it deserves. I mean, I realized that it was coming on the heels of Fire Down Under and, the what is considered the classic Riot catalog, and rightfully so. And I mean, Guy Speranza is a tough act to follow, but I thought Rhett Forrester did a great job, and I reach for Restless Breed probably as often as I reach for Fire Down Under. So I thought he did a great job. I'm glad you're talking about this because there's a scenario of a replacement singer that isn't exactly a household name. This is not a David Lee Roth transitioning into Sammy Hagar. It's Guy Speranza transitioning into Rhett Forrester. And I'm sure we've got plenty of people listening who know exactly what we're talking about. But yeah, I give Rhett a lot of credit for stepping in and putting out a great record with Riot.
Well, he went on to do much more than that, but I think Restless Breed was one that sort of like, checked all the boxes as far as a sort of follow up to the incredibly, in my opinion, unmatched record that is Fire Down Under, with what would be as close to the original Riot as possible in my eyes. That's the Riot that I fell in love with. Guy is the singer I fell in love with, but I saw Rhett Forrester with Riot, and he fit, and it gave Riot a different pair of balls. You know what I mean? Because he was rough and tumble, and he looked like a maniac. He just looked like this biker dude who's going to kill you. And I think that he made Riot a little bit more dangerous, as opposed to Guy Speranza with his afro and Jordache jeans and cut off T-shirt. Was a little bit more like a New York street kid from the 70s kind of a vibe. Like could have maybe been in a scene in The Warriors, the movie, but Rhett Forrester would have been in the rival gang, and they would have won because he was wearing leather and shit, no shirt. But I don't really understand or know the background as to why the exit of Guy and the entrance of Rhett. I do not know that.
Yeah, I don't know that either.
Yeah, but something obviously happened. Anyway, it was a switch, and I think that they pulled it off. And Riot was this band that was really poised to do a lot, much like AC/DC. And I don't think that Riot, just as a band, probably translated much after that. They were never a sort of, in America anyway, they were never sort of an arena headliner. They were like Cheap Trick. They were the ultimate American rock and roll band that was in the middle of the bill or first on the bill, playing only 20 minutes. Yeah. But in Europe, Riot is still a phenomenal ideal. And our buddy Don Van Staveren from San Antonio is still in a version of Riot right now that is, sells out large venues in Japan and Europe and plays all the festivals. So hats off. But what a great, it is a fantastic sentence and feeling and place that you took that when you said the great Fire Down Under, but I really reach for Restless Breed more often. That means the job got done.
I reach for it at least as often, and that's saying volumes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, let's talk about an elephant in the room. Let's talk about Paul Di'Anno and Bruce Dickinson coming in, and maybe what you know about reasons why that switch happened. 10 seconds on
well, I think it's pretty well documented. I mean, Steve, that Iron Maiden is Steve Harris's band, and he runs the ship, and especially in those early years was running a pretty tight ship because he was had a vision for success, and it's no secret that Paul Di'Anno was a bit of a wild guy and party animal and troublemaker and all the kinds of things that sooner or later are going to hamstring your band, I guess. As a fan, as someone, just on the sidelines, I thought Paul Di'Anno was awesome. I think everybody thinks he was awesome on those first couple of Iron Maiden records. He sounded great. He had a cool stage presence. It was kind of, as it's been said, he was kind of a heavy metal version of a punk rocker. And I thought he was great, but I don't have to do business with him, and Steve Harris does. And decided it was time for a change. And I think in the end, it was Di'Anno's inability to be as committed as Steve and the rest of the band as far as moving forward. Di'Anno was more likely to stay up all night and party rather than, make it to the next gig on time and be in a good singing voice when he had to be or whatever. That's the story that I've heard, and I think it's been documented numerous times. Now, Dickinson, exactly the opposite, right? I mean, there's a guy that's so disciplined, it's almost insane. And it's paid off. I mean, I saw him just 2 years ago in San Antonio. I mean, we're talking 35 years after getting the gig or something like that, and he's running all over the biggest arena stage you can give him, and he's not running out of breath, and he's physical, and he's hitting all the notes, and he's a freak of nature. And by the way, he's doing all that after losing a piece of his tongue to cancer. So, I mean, he's just incredible. So they definitely made a great choice in hiring him. And my all-time favorite album is The Number of the Beast. So, I love Di'Anno. I love those first two records. I think they were very important as far as laying the groundwork for what Iron Maiden became. But Bruce obviously took him to new heights that I don't think Di'Anno would have been capable of doing, and certainly not still doing. I mean, like I just said, 2 years ago at the age of, what's Bruce, in his mid to late 60s now, something like that? He's all over the biggest stage you can give him. I mean, he's as fit as a professional athlete. His voice is in incredible shape. So it's hard to say Steve Harris made the wrong decision,
No, I don't think. I don't think. Thank you, Dave. That was a lot of good stuff. I feel like you're not wrong in every way that Bruce Dickinson might be. This is going to sound crass, but as an overachiever, he's kind of this like the ultimate guy, right?
Yeah.
He's flying planes. Yeah. He produces movies. He writes books. He's a fencing champion. He's probably a soccer champion. He's probably a surfing champion, and we just don't know it. He's probably he's this.
He's a gourmet cook. He skydives. Who knows?
Keep going. So yeah. So we have that. So we have this like perfect over the top monster that's in, the biggest heavy metal, arguably the biggest heavy metal band in the world, from England anyway, the biggest English heavy metal band in the world, besides Judas Priest probably, or Black Sabbath, right? He's in the big four of English heavy metal bands.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to Paul for a second, because you have to start somewhere. And there's a lot of respect for when you're meeting at the pub or you're meeting at school and you're just a bunch of snot-nosed punk kids, or you're meeting on the corners, sneaking smokes and stuff like that, and you're just a teenager. That's what Paul Di'Anno is. He's this bloke. He's this kid under the gas lamp wearing a leather jacket, and he's got dirty jeans on and boots, Yeah. Hey, we're looking for a singer. Hey, I'll be your singer. Come on over. All right, you're our singer. Boom. 2 records later, they're gaining this footprint in America. Right. Next thing, boom, we've got this new singer. Meanwhile, the first 2 records are happening. Dickinson is in this band called Samson.
Yeah.
And obviously, he was incubating, because it's kind of like it's only a matter of time until Iron Maiden quickly becoming this holy shit of a moment that Bruce Dickinson graduates into that position. I mean, it was probably really easy for Harris to look over there and go, "Oh, there's Bruce. Look at Bruce. Oh my God. Well, Paul, you're out." And I don't know the passing of the baton. I don't know how that happened. I don't know the uglies. I don't know the sweet parts either. But Bruce is his own man, does his own thing. He was not really interested in anything that had happened on those first two records, and he does a great job of singing the material on those first two records. Obviously, same answer as the Bon Brian, mega stardom says it all. Mega
Yeah.
immediately mega stardom. I mean, Iron Maiden was the opening band for just a little while. But when Bruce
Yeah.
got a band, that was over. It was kind of
Yeah.
like Metallica, rides the stair, jumps up, slowly climbs the stairwell, and they're opening for Ozzy one year, and then they never opened for anyone else ever again.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the same thing. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you were saying earlier about Maiden being in the big four of British metal bands, and I would argue that internationally speaking, I would say they're number one. I bet if you took the record sales from across the world, they've surpassed Judas Priest. I'd say they even surpassed Black Sabbath. I could be wrong on that, but they are arguably, as you stated, neck and neck with Metallica as the most popular, the biggest, most internationally recognized heavy metal band that's out there.
I want to mention I want to mention this real quick, that in 1993, Dickinson quit Iron Maiden and Blaze Bayley from Wolfsbane came in.
Yeah.
He was Dickinson was looking to do a solo career for a few years and experiment a little bit. And I'm guessing that the Maiden camp was okay with that. I think that they were actually okay with that. I don't think that it was this anger or coming from somewhere strange.
Yeah.
Not every band would have been okay with that. I think Adrian Smith went with him to be on those solo records, and then they kind of came back together. Personally, I like Blaze Bayley's voice, just for some reason not in Iron Maiden, and I don't know why. He's an English guy. He has a good heavy metal voice, but no, I didn't. I checked out. When Blaze Bayley was in Maiden, I checked out. Of course, I kind of checked out after, like, I don't know, somewhere in time.
Yeah.
That's
so did I.
Here we go.
No, that's probably unfair, but it's true.
My producer sent me that information, so thank you. Also, back to Riot, just because it doesn't matter. I can go back. This is interesting. Did you know that Guy Speranza in like '82, when he officially quit Riot, that Scott Ian from Anthrax called him to see if he wanted to be the singer for Anthrax? Can you imagine Guy Speranza and Anthrax? I totally can. I can. Because
oh
of
my God.
Yeah,
I don't
it would
know
have
if I can picture that.
Think about Joey Belladonna real quick. Think about that voice. Think about what's going on and what he's doing. I mean, Joey Belladonna could have been in a Journey tribute band.
Yeah.
Guy Speranza can sing power metal just as good as anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the kinds of voices that they have, is a melodic hard rock singer singing this sort of power metal. Anthrax had a lot of thrash element. Of course, Anthrax has a little bit of everything, right? They're what's different about the big four of American heavy metal bands. They had a little bit more, the hip hop thing. In the 90s, they had a different thing, just like kind of Metallica sort of like changed their deal a little bit in the 90s, just to try new things. That's fine. But I thought it was an interesting fact that according to my fact checker, Guy Speranza got a call from Scott Ian from Anthrax.
Wow, that's interesting. And
before anyone really knew who Anthrax was. That's important.
Right. And speaking of Anthrax, let's not forget talk about a series of replacement singers. Started off with Neil Turbin, moved on to Joey Belladonna, moved on to John Bush, arguably one of the most underrated heavy metal singers of all time.
Yep.
had a guy named Dan Nelson for a minute, and then they kind of went back and forth between Bush and Belladonna again.
like literally 1 minute. That guy,
Yeah.
what you say, his name's Dan Johnson. He was in Anthrax.
Nelson.
Literally 1 minute. Nelson, thank you.
Yeah.
Literally 1 minute. It was like he was in, and the next day he was out. And
here's a question for you, though.
Yeah.
So speaking of John Bush, I mean, there's nobody in heavy metal that would argue he is a phenomenal singer. And I thought when he stepped into Anthrax, you know, as much as I love Belladonna, I thought John Bush was the missing piece. I thought he was going to turn that band into the monster that it almost was, but wasn't quite, you know? And I don't know if that makes sense, but I thought, you know, his more aggressive vocal style would be more suitable to the band. And I thought he was going to take them to new places, and he tried. And you know, so why don't you think they had greater success with John Bush, given his raw talent?
I love where you're going this, because it makes me think about other things. It makes me think about, why did Van Halen sell more records when Hagar was their singer?
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? So,
yeah.
Okay, so you might be on your own or in the minority here that thinks that John Bush was the man for the job in Anthrax. As much as you know me, I'm quite fond of Mr. Bush. I worship him, but I could talk about him for hours and hours. But I really think that a lot of people in the industry would rather take Belladonna, because Among the Living was arguably it was their Master of Puppets. It was their record that put them in a different place. What happened internally between Anthrax dudes and Joey Belladonna to put him out for a moment, I don't know the facts.
Yeah.
That's not really what the show is entirely about that we're doing here. But the fact that a band like Anthrax can have 4 singers. See, I had to go back, because some singers were in and then they were out.
And then they came back, yeah.
Right. But the thing is, and that's not, you know, we're not laughing at Anthrax. It's just a strange world, and you got to have a singer, and that singer has to be able to propel you to where you're aiming. And I feel like in the industry, Belladonna is the singer for Anthrax, and I've actually heard Bush actually say those words, that, you know, I'm not really the singer for Anthrax. Belladonna is the singer for Anthrax.
Yeah. So here's one I wanted to bring up, because I think this guy stepped in and filled some pretty big shoes, and I think he's done a phenomenal job, and that would be Kelly Hansen with Foreigner, replacing Lou Gramm, who, of course, you know, has one of the most iconic voices on AOR album rock radio in the 1970s, all those huge hits with Foreigner. And Kelly has stepped in, and I've heard some of the recordings that he's done, and I've seen some of the live clips. Haven't had a chance to see him in concert, but man, he does a great job doing all the Foreigner tunes. And I mean, you close your eyes and he sounds like Lou Gramm, and Lou Gramm's not an easy singer to imitate. So I wanted to get him in on this show, because I don't think many people, you know, you were talking earlier, like somebody goes, hey, Foreigner's playing at the, you know, the racetrack or the local arena, we're going to go see Foreigner, and they have no idea that Lou Gramm was the former singer. And they get there, and all they want to do is hear the hits, and they hear them sung well, and they go away none the wiser. Well, that's a credit to Kelly. I mean, I think he's done a really, really good job handling a catalog of songs that probably shouldn't be touched, and in lesser hands, you know, probably wouldn't be a wise move, but I think he's done a great job with it.
You're
Do you
you're
know
right.
anything about Kelly?
Wasn't he in? I'm going to get this wrong. Was he in a band called Hurricane? What was the band that he
Are
was in?
correct. It was Hurricane.
Hurricane. Okay, and they were a Los Angeles band, California band.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, Randy Rhoads' brother was in that band.
You,
Um,
you might
I
be right.
I think so. We'll have to fact check that as well, but I want to say that's correct. But yeah, he was in a band called Hurricane, and they had a little bit of attention, but eventually went nowhere. And he kind of came out of nowhere, or came out of obscurity, to join Foreigner, and they're doing big business, man. And I think it's because, first of all, they have timeless songs, but those timeless songs are only as good as the guy singing them. And Kelly's done a great job, so I wanted to give props to Kelly Hansen.
I agree. I wanted to jump in here and let's see. Let's see. Fact checker here started Hurricanes that said he met guitarist Robert Sarzo,
Oh,
Rudy Sarzo's brother on guitar, and bassist Tony Cavasso, Rudy Sarzo and Carlos Cavasso, respectively, a Quiet Riot fan. So
uh-huh.
there's your sort of like.
Okay. My bad on the Randy Rhoads
No,
thing.
that's all right.
I
Hansen.
knew there was a connection to another well-known name.
Yeah,
But
Hansen sang on some Don Dokken tracks like backups and harmonies and stuff. He
yeah,
worked Slash for a while in Snake Pit. Some interesting facts there. I wanted to say that when people hear Foreigner on Spotify or any platform, really, I want them to really listen and deep listen and ask themselves just as much as do the research on which version of Urgent or some insert big giant Foreigner hit, and tell themselves, learn whose voice they're hearing, because the band re-recorded those hit songs and released greatest hits and toured upon that greatest hits record.
Yep.
They re-recorded those with Kelly on vocals.
You're absolutely correct.
People have no idea it's not Lou Gramm. They think they're listening to the original version because they really tried to mirror what's happening so when they hear the band live, I don't think the band went and like made the old record label pull stock off the shelf or called the radio stations and management and said, only play the new versions with Kelly. They didn't say that, but
Right.
Same thing. Here you go. I'm going to drop a bomb right here. Journey. Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing. Re-recorded all the hits with their new singer they found on YouTube.
Yeah.
It was a karaoke singer in like Laos or something like that.
He was from the Philippines.
Yeah, that's it. And he was nailing it on video after video clip, and they just called him and flew him over, and he ended up joining the band, which is crazy. Here you go.
Yeah.
Ripper Owens. Go.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Ripper. So Ripper is obviously a great singer. He was one that I had a hard time accepting in Judas Priest because, there's just no replacing Rob Halford, right? But then again, we just got done talking about two guys who stepped in for their predecessors, and they're basically carbon copies vocally. So to their credit, it can be done. But Ripper, great singer. I just couldn't quite accept him in Judas Priest, and the two albums that he did with Priest. I'm not reaching for them every day, So not to take anything away from Ripper, great singer, just kind of, yeah, and just just not the guy for the job, in my opinion. And I was going to talk about, John Corabi with Motley Crue, same way. Great singer, just wasn't the guy for that job. And let's face it. I mean, Vince Neil doesn't have a leg to stand on anymore as far as singing, but he is the voice of Motley Crue, and he's the voice that people want to hear, even though they don't hear much of his voice anymore.
So, I want to jump in real quick. Hold that point for a second. So you got John Bush, Ripper Owens, and Blaze Bayley, who are like the in-between guys before the old guy comes back and takes back over. Right. Blaze Bayley is to Dickinson, John Bush is to Belladonna, and Ripper Owens is to Rob Halford.
Yeah. And so, which brings up the question I was going to ask you earlier, when it comes to replacement singers, what are your thoughts on, do you want the guy to sound exactly like his predecessor? Because there's lots of them, there's a handful of them that have done really good jobs doing just that. And they're making big money out of it and doing big tours, and it's serving them very well. Or are you looking for sort of a contrast, like when you talk about Dio versus Ozzy, or Hagar versus Roth, or Dickinson versus Di'Anno, where the incoming singer has his own unique vocal style, and it doesn't mirror that of his predecessor? What are your thoughts on that? Does it make sense to have a carbon copy, or does it make sense to use the opportunity to start a new identity?
I feel like when Hagar jumped into Van Halen, he was already Sammy Hagar. So he can be Sammy Hagar in Van Halen all the time. He doesn't have to change anything. I feel like where AC/DC was with their career with Highway to Hell, they hadn't reached the mega stardom yet. It was okay for them to have Brian, who's, it's blues based. It's blues based singing, but it's over the top. It's a nasty vibe, the innuendos and the creepiness that AC/DC has, and their lyrics continued. But with Brian, it was a different tone. He doesn't really have the tones that that Bon Scott had. Bon Scott was really bluesy, and he almost sounded like Popeye sometimes. He's like a pirate or something, kind of thing. And Brian didn't really have that, and that's okay because of where AC/DC was in their career, right?
Good point.
So whether it's a versus who you like better, that's not really what you're asking in the question. You're asking the question, do they need to sound like, does Ripper need to sound like Halford? He could, and he did. They found him in a Judas Priest tribute band in Ohio. That's how they found him.
Yeah.
So if they actually said, hey, can you cut that song again and do it Ripper style and not, he's calling himself Ripper because he didn't want to call himself Tim. His name's Tim. So I get that too, I get that. But now he's forever known as Ripper, and he has a career because he got to be in Judas Priest. And I think that in his own right, he's an amazing singer.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. I wanted to say, I saw Anthrax with John Bush open for Judas Priest with Ripper Owens. I saw the replacement singer tour.
Oh, wow.
I found myself watching I found myself watching all of Anthrax and walking out on Judas Priest. What is wrong with me? Walking out on Judas Priest, one of my favorite, bands in the universe, and I'm walking out. And it was exactly how that feeling that you have when you're going, I just want to hug Halford. I want Halford to be right here. I want Halford to be stalking the stage and being Halford. And I love these songs because of that. This is really good that I get to see, because KK was there. It was the band. It was, it was as close to the band as you could get. And I'm going, guy is kicking ass. I'm talking about Ripper to myself. I'm going, fuck, this guy's amazing. Let's start driving home. And it was like I said, it was like the reason I fell in love with the band is not because of Ripper, and it's not his fault. And I would listen to anything Ripper sings because, once again, one of the greatest heavy metal singers in the world, Ripper
Yeah.
Owens. But I want
Yeah.
Halford as my Judas Priest.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Here's one that a lot of people might not realize, but a band that I've always loved is Crocus. And you may not know it, but Mark Starace is not the original lead singer. Um, Starace stepped in on about album 3 or 4 and took over lead vocals from Chris Von Rohr, who is the bass player in Crocus. And of course, they had all of their international stardom and record sales and fame and all that with Mark Starace. So, and they're from Switzerland. So a lot of people in America didn't see them on their upward climb. They sort of saw them after they were established with Starace. So they just assumed Starace's always been the guy, right? But Mark didn't show up until the band already had about 3 albums done. And he just happens to be one of those singers that I like a lot. He's kind of got that Bon Scott thing. I love those raspy voice singers. They just sound like they never intended to be a singer. They're just some guy that got up to the mic and they're just raw and just letting it rage. And obviously there's an art to that, especially if you're going to have a career doing it. But I always love the guy that just sounds kind of untrained, you know, and just kind of screeching. And Starace's that guy, and he put out a bunch of great records with Crocus. So there's props to Mark Starace as being a replacement singer.
He's amazing, and I actually knew that, but I tend to forget it because I've never heard Chris Von Rohr sing anything, you know, other than backup vocal here and there. But I love Mark Starace, and he actually does sound a little bit trained to me, but he doesn't come off that way. Like Dickinson sounds
That's
trained.
what I mean.
Yeah. And actually, once again, you know, the raspy singers, you listen for the notes that he's not raspy on, and it'll trip you out that it's more often than not that he's singing clean, just like Brian Johnson, just like Bon Scott. You know, one guy that actually has a little bit, of a clean vocal as well is very much could have been an AC/DC or many other bands is Dan McCafferty from Nazareth. He would have been the perfect singer for a lot of bands, especially AC/DC, but only going by pretty much what Brian Johnson brought to AC/DC. Maybe Bon Scott, with his untimely passing, you immediately think, well, what kind of singer would you put in AC/DC? And it probably wouldn't be those guys who have that nasty cat yowl that these singers have, that brought to our attention more so in the early days by Dan McCafferty and then later Brian Johnson. Because Nazareth was already like touring America by the time AC/DC was just trying to do their thing. Right. And then Bon dies and Brian Johnson comes in from Gordy. Okay. So Brian Johnson passes away. They immediately, Bon Scott, sorry, my bad. Edit.
Brian's still alive.
Right. Edit. So Bon Scott passes away. AC/DC had just toured with this band from Canada called Moxie. The singer for Moxie and Bon Scott became really good friends, and the guys in AC/DC loved this guy, and he's really good. He reminded me of like a really young, almost like Dave King from Fastway. He reminded me of like a seedling of Robert Plant kind of a vibe, because that first Moxie record is so good and it's much like a Dirty Zeppelin record, right? Well, they were supporting AC/DC. They may have, you know, in different markets, they may have co-headlined. I don't flip back and forth, but his name, I don't know his real name, but they called him Buzz.
Buzz Sherman.
That's him. That's him.
Yeah.
And he was asked by AC/DC immediately when Bond passed away. They called that guy, and
Wow.
he didn't feel up to it. He said that would be weird. That's my mate. I don't know if I could do that. And he respectfully declined
Yeah.
and there's probably a handful of other
So
guys.
so who took over for Buzz Sherman?
Mike Ranowski, later known as Mike Reno of Loverboy fame.
Right.
Mike
Right.
Ranowski sang on the second and maybe third Moxie albums. And that's a little bit of a tidbit. And that's as far as my Moxie knowledge goes, because you can't, if you start to take the first Moxie record with Buzz on it, if you try to take that off my turntable, I'll shoot you.
And so, little sidebar here, since you're talking about Moxie and AC/DC touring together, our listeners may not know this, but you and I are living in Austin, or you're just outside of Austin. I'm in Austin. AC/DC's very first North American concert was right here in Austin, opening for Moxie. That's a fact.
I think that was at the Armadillo World headquarters, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, correct. You are not wrong.
Yeah, very good.
So,
well,
hey, here's one.
This is a note we almost should end on. So go, Dave.
Oh, I was going to ask you not to prolong this any longer, and we can keep this short, but I think there's another elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about Dio versus Ozzy, and I'm not talking about Roth versus Hagar. I'm talking to you as a Queen fan, Adam Lambert, who is now singing for Queen and carrying the torch for Queen, and talk about a guy that does a pretty good job of, as good as you could ask for, I guess, as far as emulating Freddie Mercury. And I won't forget that Paul Rodgers was in there in the interim, but I don't think they did good business with Paul on the touring circuit, because Queen had been out of commission for a while, and Paul in his own right was a big name. But I want to talk about Adam Lambert, because I think he more closely mirrors Freddie Mercury, and you are a huge Queen fan. So your thoughts on Adam?
I think Adam, in his own right, is a star. And I think that it's important for Queen to have somebody like that, who sort of can sell a ticket in his own right, as well as has the chops and the vocal ability to do whatever Queen or any Queen song in the world ever written would need vocally.
Yeah.
You're not wrong. I'm in full agreement with you that he sort of fell in their lap at the perfect time. I think Paul Rodgers is the singer for Bad Company. He's the singer for Free. And I think that it was great for him to team up with his buddies in Queen and do a series of, stadium type, shows and a tour of that, and play Bad Company songs and Free songs. And he got to sing Queen songs, and he got to sing his own material. And it was a big sort of like Paul Rodgers with Queen playing Bad Company, and hey, while you got the microphone in your hand, let's play Queen.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been awesome. That's a whole lot of legend going on right there. That's for history books. And I believe, just in my opinion, that sort of outshines the fact that not an unknown, but someone like Adam Lambert coming in and actually continuing the legacy of Queen and doing a bang up job at it is great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, we're running long on this segment, so let's go ahead and do our closing segment, our parting shot of rock. And I was going to ask you, as my parting shot of rock to you, Jason, what would we find in your record collection that we might not expect? Maybe a guilty pleasure, if you will, for lack of better term?
I feel like there's not a whole lot of transparency left when you find out that I grew up on Elton John and Queen and things like that. But because I love the Bee Gees, I love that kind of sort of like, it's more power pop to me. The Bee Gees, were like a candy coated version of the Sweet or even Cheap Trick. And they didn't like, I recently watched the Bee Gees documentary, which was
It's great.
so good.
Amazing.
And they know how to write songs. They wrote songs for people that you wouldn't imagine needed material. And I'm talking Barbara Streisand and Celine Dion, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point they had number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the charts at one time, I think.
Crazy.
I have a greatest hits Bee Gees record that I can't wait to break out since I just watched the documentary. And it's not so much that I think King Diamond sort of got his best stuff from Barry Gibb, and
wow.
but it's there. That style of singing that way and powerful and high, and that head voice turning into a falsetto.
Yeah.
The falsetto is underrated. And talk to King Diamond, talk to the Bee Gees. There's a lot of like old, like it's Frankie Valli. That was the first time I ever heard that. Even before the Bee Gees and obviously before King Diamond. But that sort of singing is really underrated. Speaking from somebody who, when I heard King Diamond, I was going, well, see, this is different than just your power metal singer in the dictionary. The picture that you see when you look up power metal singer, it's something that would look and sound like a Rob Halford. Rob Halford's not necessarily using that sort of like cheeky, falsetto-y, sort of creamy voice that King Diamond's actually using, that is the same voice as the Bee Gees and Frankie Valli.
Yeah.
But it's very, very interesting how that translates. And so I just want to, leave everybody to think about that.
Wow.
But I really do think that, I need to find my Bee Gees record. If that be what you're looking for in your shot of rock.
Well, I would have never made the connection between King Diamond and the Bee Gees, but you make a valid point. Now I will never be able to, as they say, unhear that. So,
well, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, no.
I wanted to jump in with my shot of rock is what record could be vinyl or CD or anything that you have in your collection that might have what is a sister to a record that or it's a record that had a band album cover, like it had an original album cover was like, nope, can't do that. The label pulled it maybe in a certain market. Examples would be a band from Europe or something releases the same same record domestic in the U.S. and they can't use the art because of the beliefs and what's accepted in America may not be as open-minded as somebody in Europe. What do you got?
I know what you're talking about. Off the top of my head, I can't say that I own them. I'm trying to think of one I actually own. But absent that coming to mind quickly, I know what you're talking about. An example would be the Scorpions' Love Drive or Virgin Killer. And
the whole show, but just wondering if you had anything close by that.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of that I have, again, off the top of my head, that was controversial as far as the cover art was the first Wasp EP. I actually own a copy of the Animal Fuck Like a Beast EP on Music for Nations. The flip side is Show No Mercy. And oh man, that was good. I mean, it's those are two great songs, and when that first came out, I was blown away.
That is? That's good heavy metal.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what that is. That's not sleaze rock or cock rock or hair metal that's just good heavy metal, isn't it?
Yeah. And Blackie's voice, Blackie Lawless's voice is just amazing. I mean, that's what makes it metal, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's metal music, but it wouldn't be nearly as gnarly without that voice on top of it.
Yeah.
So
well, they're chugging too. I mean, it's metal. It has every element, and he says, "I fuck like a beast." It's that. I guess that makes it cock rock there, but at the same time,
and the cover art is a cod piece with a saw blade coming through it.
Yeah,
so,
the biggest one, and I guess we ought to get going here. The biggest one that really comes to mind that is controversial, and there's probably a bunch. Maybe the Who, where they're pissing on something. I don't know if anybody has a problem with that, but there's a bunch. Is Appetite for Destruction.
Oh, yeah. Of course. I don't own the original cover. Obviously, the original cover, of course, was moved to the inner sleeve, and then was repressed many years later with the original cover. That being the Robert Williams artwork with the robot and the alleged rape scene or whatever. That was the original cover. Yeah, you're right. I don't own that, but that's every bit as that's about as controversial as you can get as far as an album cover, especially one that went on to be so widely recognized. The album, that is. But yeah, we should talk about Wasp some more on a future episode. But I think we need to wrap it up today. Jason, thank you for sharing your love of the Bee Gees. That was great. That's exactly what I was looking for. Something we didn't know about you. And I'll catch up with you again soon. To our listeners out there, it's Metal Dave Glessner on behalf of Jason McMaster signing off. Thanks for listening to another episode of Talk Louder.